My name is Erik Harrell. I'm the CEO of Keystone Education Group, and welcome to the Keystone Education Group Higher Ed podcast and chat. The purpose of this podcast is to interview industry leaders in higher ed, innovators in the industry, folks who are transforming the industry. And I'm very pleased to have Professor Andrea Nollent here, one of those innovators, transformers in our space. Very pleased to have her. And just from before we start the podcast, I just want to say that if anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat place, and then we can address the questions later in the podcast. But first of all, welcome, Andrea. Great to have you here, and delighted to spend an hour with you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. No,
absolutely, really delighted here. So I think before we start, I think it would be great if you could, tell us about just about the University of Law, some facts and figures, the mission of the University of Law. That'd be sort of a great place to start.
Okay, the University of Law is a unique institution, I would say, in that its mission at the outset was to be dedicated exclusively to the education of future lawyers. Now, the mission has broadened somewhat from there, in that we have a business school and we're expanding into other areas. But essentially, we remain true to the core mission, which is excellence in legal education. One of the key features of the university has been rapid expansion over the last 5 to 6 years. In fact, that period has seen a doubling in student numbers. And now approximately 14,000 students enroll with the University of Law this year. As I say, a doubling of numbers from 7 years ago. So significant growth, but the key feature in that growth is that it hasn't taken place at the expense of maintaining quality, indeed increasing quality, increasing student outcomes, increasing employability, degree outcomes across the portfolio. So it's been central to the mission to be successful commercially, clearly, but also to drive performance in student outcomes and employability. And that very much has been the case. I think in terms of the key mission, that employability theme permeates the University of Law. Clearly, as a university dedicated to law, the vocational nature of the education that we deliver is fundamental, and in that it's very much a focus on applied learning. So one of the standout features of the university is that most of our lecturers are practicing lawyers, or indeed in the business school, they are, again, expert practitioners who've actually been in business, or been in legal practice, which means that their approach is very much applied. It's very much case law based, and that resonates very well with students who like the application of knowledge to real life situations. And again, that's a pretty unique feature, whereby whilst there is a clear focus on engaging in the academic study of law, the key outcomes are about delivering on employment success and application of law. So we are in the legal education space the largest provider of postgraduate education in law in the UK, and another feature of the last 6 to 7 years has been the rapid growth in undergraduate education in law too. So we are now head to head in the undergraduate numbers as well, and again, that's much of that is because of an expansion geographically. So we are multi-campus based, and over the last few years have expanded our footprint both in the UK and also overseas, having campuses in both Hong Kong and in Berlin, which delivers an interesting feature, an offer to students, which is students can start in one campus and transfer to another, and then enjoy a university experience which has mobility built into it, should they so wish. And that's particularly important for students who may wish to be home-based at the outset of their studies, but may, in the course of their studies, wish to move on, develop ambition, develop more confidence to explore other cities or indeed other countries.
No, thanks for that introduction. And of course, we're gonna talk a little bit more later in the podcast about law schools and trends going on in law schools and law school education, that sort of thing. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. Obviously, one part of this podcast and the main theme of this podcast is about creating greater diversity in higher leadership, education leadership, and that's the topic that we're going to sort of start with. But before we jump to that, it'd be great if you could just tell us a little bit about your background. What was your path to becoming Vice-Chancellor of University of Law? I think that'd be very interesting for people to hear about, is sort of that the path you took.
Okay. Right, so scrolling back to the beginning, I suppose then, which is a long time ago. So I don't come from a family of high academic achievers. In fact, I'm the youngest child of three, first in my family to go to university. Which is a big deal, it was a real sea change in aspiration for me. My mum was a single parent from about very early 30s, so she brought the three of us up, and but instilled in us all three very much an ambition to excel in whatever field we chose. And I think in terms of real drive, not ambition for the sake of it. I think it was very much ambition because if you believe that you have the confidence to make a difference, then you should. And so really from quite challenging background in terms of time and money, the encouragement as always to do as well as possible. So, my mum was absolutely key in my growth and development. She, in fact, she in her 30s as a single parent went back to college and qualified in her professional field, and we studied together in a sense. Me in my teens and her having gone back to college and working part-time to get those qualifications. So that was a key feature in my childhood. I then went to university in Scotland. I chose law because, again, it had a vocational element to it. It wasn't. It was very much a career choice in law rather than an academic choice. Although it's a choice that I enjoyed hugely, and really, we can talk a little bit later about law. But it was a hugely enjoyable experience for me, and clearly the path was written. To go into to join a law firm and to go and practice law. I deviated almost by accident. So my career moving into education was very much, a friend asked me to do some teaching at an evening class. I did it and I loved it. I fell absolutely head over heels in love with teaching, and my students, who happened to have been, that first cohort of students were just tremendously inspiring. And I realized that without being immodest, I actually was quite good at teaching. I quite liked imparting the knowledge and the love of the subject that I had learned, and again it came as a surprise, and it was really quite a deviation from the track that was plotted, but it's certainly not one that I've ever regretted. In fact, it's been a hugely enriching career. But I think the key piece in all of that potted history was success didn't come overnight, and I think it would be absolutely wrong to suggest that careers in academia or in teaching indeed, or in leadership in universities happen very quickly. They don't. They are learned. There's a long path towards through that academic journey, as a researcher, as a teacher, as a leader, as a manager, to learn a huge range of skills and knowledge that are required, I feel, to really be in a position where you can contribute and lead effectively. Large universities with huge responsibilities to both the staff and particularly to students and the student outcomes, and the investment they've made in the university. So my first role in a university was, I spent 20 years in universities building a career as an academic and a researcher. I became a dean of faculty, and as I say, that was an incremental growth, a lot of learning, a hugely enjoyable path, but it was one that was absolutely necessary to build that base for skills and knowledge and confidence to be able to lead.
Mm. Did you? I mean, I'm super interested in this sort of thing, this topic of folks, their kind of career journeys, and what inspires them and what motivates them. And one of the things I'm curious about is, I mean, did you have, when you went to law school, did you have the ambition to be in higher ed leadership, to be a leader in a higher ed institution at a law school? Was that your ambition, or was that an ambition that you sort of developed, as you went through your career? I'm just sort of curious, when did you decide, wow, I think I really want to be a leader as well in the, at a law school? I mean, when did that happen, and how did that happen, I guess, is the question.
Quite early on, although I knew that I had to do a lot of time served, I had a lot of learning to do. I quite early on, I realized that first of all, I enjoyed what I was doing. I had a real impact, and I could make an impact on students and those around me, and that was hugely motivating for me. But I think, and again, I think this is one of the key parts of my journey. It's been other people who have supported me and nurtured me, and I think that's a really important. It's very humbling to have been the beneficiary of really, really key mentoring. So I had a woman, somebody who I really would not have had any, on a personal level, we had nothing in common. She was a woman 20 years older than me, but really she, in my late 20s, when I was trying to work in terms of being an academic, trying to look at course development, trying to look at innovation in course design, she really took me under her wing, and not just me, a number of us. And she was a mathematician and was very exacting. But what she also had, and again, I think this is really important, she was great fun. And she brought to the picture a degree of collective camaraderie, that it was together we would be successful, and that teamwork and that collective sharing of success was really infectious. So we really carried each other along, and I think just a little bit of that was enough to really accelerate my desire to achieve and to lead, and the realization that I could. And I think that affirmation, we all need affirmation, and we all have a responsibility to affirm in others and encourage in others the chance of success. So yeah, a long-winded way of saying quite early on, but I was lucky that I had really outstanding people to mentor me and to really to make me I realized I had that potential.
But it seems, did she seek you out, or did you seek her out? I mean, I'm thinking about folks who are listening in now and listening to the podcast later on. It's just what's proactive versus, I'm just kind of curious. Did you seek her out, or did she seek her out, or did she seek you out? I'm just curious how that.
Yeah, I think there's always a combination of two things. But I mean, people won't seek you out unless you you make yourself readily available. So I think there's it's an interesting balance. You right from the very start, you seize opportunities. As opportunities arise, you step forward, you volunteer, you become part of teams. Even if some of the things don't turn you on particularly, starting out in a career, building a career, you need to be coming forward, and as you do, those people will scoop you up. And you know, that's equally true at any point in your career, because we never stop learning, of course, but particularly earlier on. Whilst I'd like to say good leaders will find those with potential, yes, they will, but you have a responsibility to yourself as well to really engage proactively wherever you can. So I think it was a combination. Clearly, I looked keen. I wanted to be engaged. I put myself forward where opportunities arose, and that was very much taken up, and in many ways, you know, set me on a course, a much faster track and a much more enjoyable track than I might have had otherwise.
I mean, what from looking at it from a mentor standpoint, because there's obviously folks listening in who are also potential mentors. I mean, what can we as mentors do, both men and women? What can we do to encourage more diversity in leadership positions? What advice would you give us? What are some ways to encourage more diversity in leadership, to encourage more people to seek out these roles, these leadership roles?
Yeah, I think first of all, we have a huge responsibility as leaders to share opportunity, to really make opportunities open. To, you know, in the olden days, you know, I can remember teams where, you know, only the people in the know got the chances, the opportunities, you know, and it was very much a kind of closed shop. And you think, well, how did they get to do that? But I think so. It's very much, you know, almost a kind of quantification of opportunity, and then real disclosure of ways in which people can become involved, and trying to understand and communicating when people don't take up those opportunities. Why? You know, it's not enough to say, well, we put ourselves, you know, that we put them out there and no one took up the opportunities, because if that's a certain group of people who don't, be that women or be that more certain types of students or staff, it's incumbent on leaders to really have a responsibility to ensure that there is representation from across groups in taking up those opportunities, and that really is, it turns the responsibility back on the leaders to really quantify and ensure that there is a broad representation of colleagues, of students, or staff who are taking up the opportunities that you're putting out there, and it's an alarm bell, a real alarm bell, if your teams are clearly holding back or not putting themselves forward, or only certain types of colleague are coming forward, be that male, female, or of different groups. And again, I think there's a sophistication in understanding why certain groups may not come forward. And so, for example, I use some, again, it's a long time ago, but one of the most enjoyable parts of my early career was travel. And building new partnerships with other universities, dual degrees. There's the beginning of the Erasmus program, and this is in the 1990s. Lots of European travel, meeting really interesting people, etc., etc. And we come back with lots of opportunities to go and teach in Italy, in Spain, in France, all over Europe. Fabulous opportunities to really develop and expand. Now, there's, you know, clearly there are constraints on us in terms we can't all take out the opportunity to travel and go and teach. That might be about childcare. It may be about confidence. It may be about just not really understanding what it takes to go and deliver a lecture, let's say in a huge lecture theatre in France. So much of that. So, you know, there's no point putting out the opportunity if you know that most people would be hugely intimidated or just not be confident enough to engage in that. And so again, it's making sure that it's not just an offer of a once in a lifetime chance. It's also about support and development within that, and mentoring and really guiding colleagues through the process to make sure that they can come forward and do that. So it's a huge and multi-layered responsibility as a mentor. There's nothing, but it certainly isn't as simple as not just sharing opportunities. It's sharing them, but supporting people in taking up those opportunities to really benefit from them and grow.
Yeah. So we've talked about things from a sort of mentor standpoint, but I think one of the things that I'd love to hear more about, if you could maybe be a little immodest for a moment. I mean, because one of the things that you did a tremendous job of at the University of Law was creating a much more diverse leadership team, administrative staff. I know when we spoke, it was extremely important to you that the staff reflected the student body. But I think it'd be interesting to hear sort of your journey. How did you transform the leadership and the administration? How did you actually do that? I mean, I think it's really interesting, from an institutional standpoint. And if you're a dean or you're a president of a university, how do you create a sort of more institutional approach to this? So there's some takeaways from your experience at the University of Law that you can, pass on to other leaders listening in.
Yeah, okay. I think, the University of Law leadership team, the executive was majority were women. That was certainly not inherited. So again, in joining the university, and clearly one looks around and assesses the experience, the knowledge, the caliber of the individuals who are there. It was very clear to me that there was an outstanding, very, very rich resource at the university of experienced female administrators and academics. In fact, the University of Law is quite unusual in that the majority of its academic staff are women. Not quite, around 60%, but again, that's constantly changing. That wasn't reflected in the leadership team when I arrived. However, again, looking, basically creating a new executive team allowed me to explore what the resources were that were there. I think it's important as well. New leaders come in and tend to look to bring their teams with them, and I think there's a value to that. But I would say in the first instance, really exploring what the richness of the resource at hand is hugely important, particularly when a university or an organization has gone through a pretty consistent period of change. It's important to ensure stability and confidence. And so because the university had gone through a long period of change, it was important to really extract the very, very best and promote the very best within that team. And those women, and they know who they are, they're brilliant. They really had a collective experience and know-how that was the engine for growth, innovation, and stability. And I think we underestimate the need for stability in changing times. So again, I think as well, again, I don't want to be controversial, but I think women bring certain to encourage women within leadership roles and to step forward. I think one can develop a culture which is slightly different to one which may be characterized by more male-dominated leadership teams. And again, I'm not. This isn't scientific, and it's not meant in any way to be hostile to male teams in that way. But I think teamwork and trying to cultivate a culture of where confrontation is not what is seen as being progressive or really going to deliver on what's required. So consultation, very much a collective The cult of the individual, I think, has very little place in effective leadership teams. Now, that's probably very controversial. There's probably lots and lots of empirical evidence which challenges that. But in my experience, to bring forward and work with more diverse teams, the cult of the individual, it's not about the individual. It is very much about how you bring on, engage, and in a non-confrontational, collaborative way. Can I just say as well, I think childcare is absolutely fundamental to the piece, and understanding that not just childcare, but for whatever the dynamic, women do bear a lot of that responsibility, but also for parents as well, and caring responsibilities. So those boards or those leadership teams where routinely there are meetings in the evening or early morning or crazy things which are totally unnecessary in a well-run organization, really delivering on an agenda which is time constrained, where you can rely on your working day and not be constantly angst about getting home or about your other responsibilities, gives a much greater stability and confidence to be and come forward. And I think that that plays through in women coming forward, and women then staying in that zone, and then themselves moving forward to be to put themselves forward and be successful and apply for promotion, and bring other women along with them. So I do think it's a tone, it's a culture, it's a positioning as well, and I think that does permeate across an organization, and that isn't in any way to preclude men coming into the team, which we have wonderful men too, but in terms of that balance and that representation, I think that was very much my experience, and one which I would wish to develop moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, of course, everything you're saying is applicable to the private sector as well. So I think this is great for business leaders to be getting this type of input and advice from you. So thanks for sharing. One thing we spoke about, in sort of conversations before the podcast was, I think one thing that you seem very interested in, I mean, it was sort of leadership, sort of crisis leadership, and leadership during COVID times. And then for everyone's benefit, Professor Andrea Nollent, you left University of Law just some months ago, right? I think it was in August. So it's just recent, and I think that's a very interesting topic. It's one that I've thought a lot about, which is how did you approach leadership during COVID times, and then also what are some takeaways going forward? Because I know personally, as a leader, as a CEO of Keystone Education Group, there are definitely some things that I learned from COVID times that I've incorporated permanently into my leadership playbook, if you will, or the approach that we take with employees and the business. So I'm really interested in, I think others will be very interested as well, hear more about the things that how you handled COVID-19, what your approach was, and then also the things that you will take forward in your future leadership roles.
Yeah, I think again, it's also it's wonderful affirmation of the adage, we never stop learning. That day back in March 2020 is etched upon all our memories. I think, and my experience as a leader to that point, I think I changed. There was certainly a distinct change in how I personally changed to adapt to that leadership challenge. I think overnight, what was required was, above all, is assurance, confidence, and rapid response. Clearly it was a rapidly changing environment. everyone was very concerned, worried, and having a calm and a calm presence and an assurance that we would step by step work through the crisis, and the constant reassurance that that was the case was absolutely key. And I think what became clear almost immediately was that everyone, the responsibility of the leadership was to have consistent and clear communication, and we couldn't communicate too much. So on a daily basis, having senior teams, senior management, and also engaging with the wider university in terms of colleagues as well as students, just step by step, even when there was nothing really to update. It was to still be there with the reassurance that as things changed, we would share that information. That and as I say, so, it's interesting. Sometimes there was nothing really to say other than that. We're collectively we're working together. We'll support each other, and so I think in that whole piece, what was very clear was communication is absolutely, well, it is critical in any leadership role, but throughout the pandemic, that was the key takeaway. And the key, Eric, as you say, what is endured and what will persist beyond, hopefully, the pandemic will be that learning, which is collective communication, engagement, support, not just communication one way, but also inviting, again, there are many advantages to the pandemic in terms of greater visibility online, in terms of Zoom calls. So it allowed an outreach, really outreaching to 600 university staff. They were all on that Zoom call. The chats were busy. People were coming forward. A lot more engagement. And what we got was very much very strong feedback, which was, hey, this is great. We know what's going on. We're part of an organization who are talking to us. Again, it may not have been something that was constructive in terms of dissemination of information, but it was a collective esprit de corps, which I think is really, really a very powerful and quite transformational shift in an organization, which, if that can be maintained post-pandemic, I think will continue to really gel organizations together, both universities, higher education, and beyond. So yeah, lots and lots of learning. But I think in terms of really as a leader, it was getting down and dirt, getting down into the real nitty gritty of how essentially you move from one week to another, to delivering classes online, not in a way that is delivered through technology, that staff may not have had all of that training to really push that training forward, to make sure that students had what was required in terms of technology, in terms of laptops and access to the IT. So huge logistical challenges, which again, I think as we shared all of those that information and that transition, a lot of the different groups across the university started to understand what other groups did. And I think that again is that collective understanding of the multifunction university is really key. And I would hope that for many people, it probably gave them a greater depth and breadth of knowledge, and will allow themselves to be equipped with the skills and knowledge to progress their own careers in the future.
Do you think have student expectations? So I mean, I guess what I'm hearing also is that have student expectations changed in terms of what they expect? I mean, that's kind of what you're sort of indicating is that maybe student expectations have changed in terms of what they expect from leaders at universities.
In terms of leadership, I think you can overstate the importance of leadership in universities to students. Let's not kid ourselves. It's students want high quality education with outstanding outcomes. So again, the personality is not the issue. The issue is the quality of what's being delivered. So I think in terms of during the pandemic, communication was important, that students were being heard. And I think, again, that visibility was important, both at a course, a campus, a dean, a vice-chancellor level. And there were some very difficult times. It was a challenging time for students. It was equally challenging for staff to be able to make the shift to a different way of learning. So I think how students' interface with the university did change, and their expectations of the university, given that they I think probably had not really understood, or ever, why should they? They were receiving the services, the educational services of the university. So how we transitioned and took them on that journey, and it wasn't all plain sailing for any university to get it right. I think students did show huge goodwill and patience and innovation, and they were brilliant, and they performed superbly well, given the challenges that were presented to them. But I think we on that journey really delivered to the very best of our abilities in a difficult context. What is interesting is students clearly don't. Well, certain students do want to go back to that face-to-face, all of those things that are cherished about undergraduate education. But they want more than that now. And I don't think we're ever going back to the pure on-campus experience, because students want choice and flexibility, and so they should. And I think the pandemic did show that students' behaviours in terms of having recorded lectures, having interactive seminars, when it came to coming back to campus, which is crucially important, particularly for undergraduate students. They want to come back, but they also want all of that other functionality. They want to be able to download the lecture. They want to be able to attend remotely a seminar where there are remote attendees and also students attending in person. So all the technology that is going in to perfect those methods of teaching are being accelerated to match the expectations of students, so that they can basically select their means, that they can select how they want to attend and when they want to attend, and I think that's a real advantage. It's one of the very positive outcomes of the pandemic, and I don't think there will be any return to if there already was a transition away from that traditional way of learning. So a very, very different world, and we haven't seen all of the real impact yet, because I think students' behaviours are still changing. There's an element of relief at being back on campus. We've still got to see a lot of the impact in terms of performance, which still looks very, very positive, but also how students feel about the way they've learned. And how they want to learn going forward, given that many of our undergraduates, for example, will move into a postgraduate world. And indeed, whether the whole premise of transferring traditional learning onto an online format is radical enough, or whether we need to go some steps beyond. And that's a really exciting part of looking at what the future will bring in terms of education.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think I was in the UK last week. I was in the US a couple of weeks ago. Meeting with customers and partners and companies that we have, and certainly what I was hearing was that student expectations have changed in terms of engagement from leadership at universities. I think they, at least that's what I'm hearing. There's a great expectation for universities to support students and then I think just greater visibility of leaders. I think at least what I'm hearing is their expectations have been reset in that way, at least. And then secondly, of course, in general, not specifically about law, because law is a great profession because it's a very clear path to a job, but certainly employability is definitely, and students are very focused on when they choose a school, they choose or choose a degree. They're much more focused than they were pre-COVID in a degree leading to a job.
Yeah,
probably a function of the COVID effects of the uncertainty created from COVID.
Yeah, so. Just to pick you up on that, in terms of support, I think again one of the key pieces is not just the kind of innovation in course design and delivery to be flexible and to deliver that to deliver teaching and teaching and learning in a more flexible format. I think the pandemic, the bigger picture of the pandemic is support above and beyond the teaching core. And what we saw was, the University of Law already had really significant resource in employability. Again, as you say, because it was primarily a law school and a long tradition of doing that. But with not all undergraduate students who study law or business necessarily want to go into those professions. So again, it's about building all of that infrastructure around that supports that exposes students to more than the classroom in terms of be that technical support, be that life skills above and beyond. In many events, on many occasions, a lot of that is integrated into courses, but the pandemic saw that much more above and beyond that in terms of pastoral care, in terms of, as we know, the huge impact on mental health and the support that was required and the investment therein, and the responsibility of universities to step up to that and invest in that. And again, in terms of leadership, absolutely, that was and continues to be a real focus for universities post-pandemic.
Yeah, I've heard the theme mental health pretty consistently in the conversations I've had. And this is US and UK, both sides of the Atlantic. So it's definitely an impact. I think one thing we haven't discussed yet, and we ought to, which is sort of about the education law, so the legal education. What are some trends in the law profession or legal education that you'd sort of point out today? How is it changing? How is the education of lawyers changing? If you compare sort of 5-10 years ago to now, and how you see things going forward. What sort of changes do you see?
Well, and over the last 5 years, we've been law schools have been preparing for a major change in terms of the qualification of lawyers. In that the current training, the current vocational training system is changing with the introduction of the solicitor's qualifying examination, which means that a whole new regime of centrally set exams will be introduced over the next 2 to 3 years. So at the University of Law and in other law schools, there have been major changes to those postgraduate qualifications and changes in the way in which they will be delivered. Again, it comes back to choice in the sense that for example, at the University of Law, there's a comprehensive range of choices available to students who wish to qualify as a solicitor, from very hands-off, quite minimal input, right through to master's degrees as they stand at the moment, to ensure that the graduates are trained and will pass the solicitor's qualifying exam and move into employment. So major change in the education of lawyers over the next 2 to 3 years as that transitions in. I think in terms of legal education in general, because we tend to focus on the vocational and the passage through to qualification. I think another trend over the last few years has been, both in undergraduate education and postgraduate legal education, the appreciation that knowing the law isn't enough. Lawyers need to know the law, full stop, and that's a significant part of an undergraduate degree, and indeed a postgraduate degree, preparing you for the profession. But it's much more than that. Lawyers need to be trusted friends, trusted advisors to clients. They have a role above and beyond the technical area of law, and that does involve a greater understanding and appreciation of business and the commercial aspects of business, in terms of client care, and as I say, being a trusted advisor to a client. So at the University of Law, the undergraduate and postgraduate degrees and qualifications all were reviewed to incorporate elements of business, both from a client care perspective, but also from a more commercial understanding of the needs of clients of different types. So the law and the legal profession is constantly evolving, and the great thing about a law school is that responsibility to innovate, to anticipate what is required, but also to listen to law firms, listen to our client base. The University of Law has an extensive range of client firms, and again, they are trusted partners in understanding what they need in terms of future employees, what their clients are telling them, and that virtuous circle in terms of engagement is really fundamental to understanding what our responsibility as law school is to embed within that huge rate, that extensive range of legal qualification, from a foundation degree right through to postgraduate qualification and continuing legal education, because we have lots of university has lots of qualified professionals who come back for updating and development. So particularly crucial moment in the change in legal qualification, but again, it's building on that constant innovation, improvement. Ultimately, lawyers serve the public. Is delivering a service which is absolutely critical to within society, and ensuring that our graduates have the skills and knowledge to both be outstanding employees, but also really delivering with impact within society is fundamental.
How did you institutionalize sort of the connections in industry? I mean, how did you sort of create this institutional dialogue from business, or not? From law firms. So you got it. Yeah. What was the process of actually organized such a way that it really had a broader impact on the university in terms of curriculum development and? Yeah.
Well, I think the University of Law, and previously the College of Law, has a very rich tradition of delivering professional courses to industry, and many of the students that we have are sponsored by law firms. Either they're paying the fees of those students to study with the University of Law and with other providers. So that relationship has been built over many decades, and with that comes the responsibility to and the opportunity to really listen and engage. So it is very much a three-way piece, because it's not just the law firms, it's the legal regulators, it's the market, it's the legal experts, and it's also the students and what they want to achieve as well. So that dialogue is ongoing. The University of Law has a dedicated team led by outstanding members of the executive who focus all their time on liaison discussion with law firms, both firms that work with us, but also firms who work with other providers. Again, there is in that sense that it is a constant dialogue to ensure that as the law evolves, as client services evolve, as society evolves, that it's very much kept up to date, and that is quite a singular feature of the University of Law, and a small number of law schools who have that relationship, those exclusive relationship with firms. So again, a lot of investment, a lot of time, but absolutely critical. And again, it's one of the reasons why students want to come to the University of Law, because of those those relationships with firms, and their opportunity to engage with firms when they arrive at the university.
One thing that you said at the outset, and it's also something we've spoken about before, is the focus on, I guess, to put it sort of more in a business term, the customer, right? I mean, I know that in as a leader, you were very focused on, student centricity, customer happiness. I mean, how you talked a little bit about how did you ensure sort of satisfaction, sort of customer satisfaction, and how did you measure the happiness of students along the way, along the journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's you could spend a lot of time on talking about satisfaction and outcomes and whether they're the same thing. I mean, ultimately, a student will be satisfied if the outcomes from their, if they have successful outcomes. That comes back to the employability piece. So I think and the sector has measured satisfaction in separate metrics from, for example, through the National Student Survey, as slightly separate to outcomes. And there is a coalescing of those metrics as we move forward, where the Office of Students now is much more focused on outcomes rather than satisfaction, and the happiness of the student isn't necessarily the first and foremost. I'd like to think that the two combine. I think the real from very, very early on, one of the key factors, I think, in terms of my development career is metrics, and really the forensic analysis of data. In the early days, when I started in universities in the 90s, there was very little examination of student outcomes, be that in terms of academic performance, in terms of progression, in terms of employability, and in terms of student feedback, just mere, straightforward feedback. So I think one of my early roles was very much about collating a suite of metrics, which allowed us to review the success of a course, and indeed of a lecturer, and indeed of the university as a whole. And so we were doing that long before the sector was doing it. And I think that probably came back because of a law background, because clearly client satisfaction is absolutely key, be that the student or be that the employer who is seeking to employ the student, but also the success in terms of pass rates, in terms of classification, and that also goes back to diversity, ensuring that there is a consistency in outcomes and equal opportunity for students who are progressing, similar students who are progressing through those routes. So I think it was, as I say, the forensic analysis of performance was really been critical to driving interventions. So obviously, it's not just finding out what the performance is; it's then understanding what can be done to intervene and assist, and that can come in all kinds of different forms. It may be changing assessment methodology. It may be really getting feedback, which allows an understanding of why particular courses or assessments are not working for the student. Again, and I think it's very much about not taking performance as not pushing back and saying, well, it's just about standards, because it's not just about standards. It's a little bit like saying, well, we have an imbalance of genders on boards. That's not because people aren't good enough. It's because, well, first of all, that's not the objective. The objective is to have an equal balance, a fair representation. So why isn't that happening? So exploring why that's not happening and putting in place interventions to ensure that the direction is changed has been key. So data is all, and continues to be. And it can be oppressive sometimes. It can sometimes look like it deflects from the task at hand, but really the sector has moved hugely in terms of really understanding the measures that we take in terms of looking at students' success, outcomes, employment, and indeed satisfaction.
So I have sort of two final questions. And the first one is, if you could, I'd like to talk also about, my second question just will be about your future plans, but we'll come back to that. But I'm just looking back for a moment. I mean, what are you most proud of in terms of what you've achieved in the past? And I guess related to that, what would be some quick summarize quick advice for a leader who's trying to encourage more women in their leadership team and more diverse leadership team, and also those who are aspiring to be leaders? So that's sort of a three-pronged question, but love your thoughts on that, and just in terms of a summarize your thoughts.
Okay, I split the two because I think in terms of what I'm most proud of, I'm proud of the teams I've worked with, and I hope that I've had some impact in developing and nurturing careers. So I hope that. But I mean, I don't know. I have to say though that the thing I'm most proud of is all of those graduation events where I've celebrated the outcomes for students, because the universities are not ultimately, universities are about students and success, and that is without a doubt my the most wonderful takeaway from my career. I think in terms of teams and women, and how and not just women, but in terms of diversity, I think really you've got to get really tough and ask some very tough questions, because the status quo isn't good enough. And we can be. I am a non-confrontational, pretty easygoing person, but it's not good enough. And if you are in a team which clearly is not representative of society or the students that you're teaching, and someone's saying, well, it's about talent, well, I think you have to pause and say, it's my responsibility as a leader, because this is not, I have failed if I am not really agitating here for change. And it has to be constant, because it slips and people will keep coming back and saying, well, we have to employ the best people. And again, the point is, they cannot, if you are saying the best people are not representative, what are you saying about parts of society, be that women, be that the whole ethnicity and diversity of society? So it's about getting real, and agitating and not letting it go, because it's easy to let it slip. But we have a responsibility to keep pushing, not in it's not an aggressive piece, because that's not, it's that persistence that you can't be serious if you really think that teams should not, you have to go out and really actively engineer the ways in which you can recruit representative, high quality teams. And it's doable, it can be done, and can be done hugely successfully. So that's my takeaway, which is a little bit more hard edged, but it's certainly imperative on leadership, both across both, I would say, universities and society as a whole.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just final question, love to hear about your future plans. What is the future going to bring for you? What's your next, talk about your next role?
Well, I've got a range of opportunities open to me. I'm enjoying at the moment having a sabbatical and doing some voluntary work and some research, which is such a long time since I've done it. So I've got another role to come back to in the new year. and we'll see from there. But for now, going back to being an academic is really wonderful, and doing some research and giving a little bit back as well. I think, you know, having a couple of voluntary roles within the community, within the sector, is great as well. If I can share some of my some of what I've learned, and let's see what the new leadership role in the new year brings.
Okay, no, great. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time with us, and also thanks so much for the time we had 2 conversations before this, and I've really enjoyed these conversations, and I honestly, you know, have learned a lot and have been inspired by what you've done. So there's some definite takeaways for me going forward in my leadership, and I know it's the case for anyone who's listening in. So I just want to say thanks.
Well, thank you. It's been
sharing your thoughts.
Great pleasure to talk, and you know, happy to answer any questions if anyone has them now, or indeed at all. You know, do get in touch.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay,
take care. Okay.